We do appreciate everyone's presence this evening. I'll invite you to turn to the book of 1 Timothy. On Sunday evenings over the last few weeks, we've been taking our lessons from 1 Timothy, not going verse by verse or section by section through the book, but looking at some of the main ideas and some prominent themes that run through the book. We noted, just sort of in a general survey of the book at the very beginning of this project, that there were false teachers in the city of Ephesus. That's where Timothy is. Paul is not there, but that's where Timothy is, in the city of Ephesus. And he's called to teach or to take on false teachers. There are some false teachers there that are causing some problems for the church. And so Paul tells Timothy at the very beginning of the book that he is to take up that particular situation and do his best to deal with it. And so he says in verse 3 of chapter 1 that he is to instruct certain men not to teach strange doctrines. And so we look in the very beginning, the second lesson was that Timothy was to lay a foundation of good instruction and what we might call positive teaching about various subjects. And as we try to do that for the church today, there are a number of subjects that we want to address in our teaching, and in that way you provide a framework or a foundation for the church by which and with which they can deal with issues as they arise from time to time. And so we talked about exhorting in sound doctrine, and then also taking on the false teaching and the false teachers and the doctrine, the false doctrine that they were teaching. And so he was also to refute those who stand in opposition to false doctrine. And we have to do some of that as well in our own experience. As erroneous ideas arise, as false teaching is promoted in the church, we need to deal with that and deal with that in a very specific and straightforward sort of way. Well, we're going to move on to a new idea tonight, still talking about Timothy there in the city of Ephesus, dealing with false teaching. One of the things that he was to do was to put in place strong and effective leadership so that they could guide the church in these matters and then in other matters as well as the situations arose. You might wonder sometimes, at least I have, why there are some local churches that are severely affected when religious error is advanced among the members, but other local churches are not. And so in a given area, maybe throughout the country, a certain idea might be accepted by some, and it might just sweep through the nation. And some churches, they're really greatly affected by that false teaching or erroneous doctrine. But other churches, they stand firm. They're not affected by it very much. So what's the difference? Why is it that some churches are affected but other churches are not? Well, I suppose I would be making a mistake if I tried to reduce it to just one factor and just say, well, in every case, this is what's wrong with the churches that are swept away, or reduce it to just a handful of factors. And so it may be that different reasons apply in different places at different times and things like that. But I don't think that there can really be any doubt that some churches suffer because of the mistakes made by the leaders of the church. And so it's ineffective leadership, at least in some of the cases, if not most of them, ineffective leadership that really leads to the problems in the church. I used this illustration back a couple of weeks ago when we began this. If you're a baseball fan or football fan for that matter, and your team loses year after year after year after year, it's not the player. I mean, it is the players in some ways, but it's not the players. It's the leadership. It's the front office. It's the general manager. It's the president. It's the athletic director. Who really are, those people are unwilling to take the necessary measures to get quality players in place so that the team can be successful. For years, now the Cubs are good this year, but for years the Cubs were sort of lovable losers. And, just year after year, the Cubs are cellar dwellers. Why is that? Well, one suggestion was that the leaders, the president, the general manager, those in the front office, they understood that they could make more money losing than they could winning. You're selling out the stadium every game and you're losing. Why should I spend millions of dollars on a high-priced good player when I can make more? I can make more money losing. And so sometimes it's the front office, it's the leadership. That's the reason that teams struggle year after year after year. And so it's similar to that in churches. It's the leadership that doesn't lead effectively, that doesn't make good sound decisions, that doesn't really put in place a foundation or a framework that will help the members of the church deal with problems and issues as they arise from time to time. Some local churches have very few quality leaders, and so when issues arise, their voices are drowned out by the many other voices of those who are not effective leaders. If you've sat in a men's business meeting, maybe you've seen a situation like this. They don't have elders in the congregation, and there are leading men in the church. In Acts chapter 15, you had some leading men of the congregation. So all churches, most churches, I kind of hesitate to use words like all and none, So most churches have some leading men or leading members of the church. And if you've sat in a men's business meeting, you may have seen situations where people who are good, strong men, they're good leaders, they're leading men in the church, and yet their voices are drowned out by people who are not even minimally qualified to be elders. And so, no wonder you got troubles. No wonder you got problems in the church. And so damage results. Some churches have nominal leaders in name only. I think they may serve as elders, put that in quotation marks, but really they lack the necessary wisdom and insight and perception to see problems in their early stages of development, and by the time they see a problem, it's too late to act and keep damage from occurring in the church. And so again, it's a failure in leadership in that kind of instance. Some local churches have problems because the leaders have not acted proactively. And so they really haven't put into place an effective teaching program or a good foundation, a good framework from which the members can operate to keep problems from arising and spreading. We need to equip the members of the church with teaching and encouragement so that Christ will be in them. And that's really our goal. Our goal is for Christ to be perfected in every individual. And if Christ is perfected in every individual, if each person has Christ dwelling in them fully, in a mature, fully developed way, we'll have church problems? No. And so the goal of the leadership is to equip every person under his charge so that they have Christ dwelling in them in this way, this fully developed way. And then problems in the church will be greatly minimized. And so local churches face challenges over time, but effective leadership will not only keep them from spreading like gangrene. You remember the problems in Ephesus were spreading like gangrene? And so you got effective leaders. When problems do arise, and they do arise from time to time, well then good leadership will be able to keep these problems from spreading like gangrene, but also establish practices that will inhibit the rise of problems in the first place. And so Paul leaves Timothy in Ephesus to deal with the false teachers there, and one step he wants Timothy to take is to appoint strong, qualified leaders who can take on the problems and deal with them effectively. And so we're going to talk about elders tonight. Elders and presbyters, pastors who have the oversight of the church. And so we're just going to note just several things from the book of Timothy, 1 Timothy and Titus, and some other passages in the New Testament talk about elders and their work this evening. Well, first of all, we'll say that in the New Testament, various terms are found for men who serve the local church in this way. And so here in 1 Timothy chapter 3, Paul says, it's a trustworthy statement. If any man aspires to the office of overseer, it's a fine work he desires to do. And so in the church, there are to be men who oversee the church. Well, these men who are called overseers here are also in the New Testament called elders or presbyters, from the Greek word presbyteros. But they are also called bishops, from the Greek word episkopos, to oversee. And so in the New Testament, the term elder and bishop refer to the same office. Now that's not what you find in some churches today. You'll find a bishop occupying an office, an elder occupying a different kind of office. But in the New Testament, and this is what we want to reproduce here at Oak Mountain, what we find in the New Testament, elders and bishop, those terms refer to the same office. Well, let's just take a minute or two to establish that point from the Scriptures. Look at Titus chapter 1. Now, Titus is faced with a similar situation. He's in a different place. He's on the island of Crete. And so Paul tells him in verse 5, I left you in Crete that you would set in order what remains and appoint elders in every city as I directed you. Namely, if any man is above reproach, the husband of one wife, having children who believe, not accused of dissipation or rebellion. For the overseer, there's the word bishop in King James Bible, the word bishop. And so it's very clear in this passage that the elder, verse 5, I want you to appoint elders in every city, and they are to fit this fit this description, because the bishop or the overseer must be, and then he proceeds. And so the term elder and bishop referring to the same office in that passage. Look at Acts chapter 20. Acts chapter 20. Acts 20, Paul goes to the island of Miletus. He calls the elders from the church at Ephesus, not that far away, to come down and to talk with him. And so in verse 17 it says, from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called to him the elders of the church. Interestingly enough, Ephesus is where Timothy was, although that it's later than this particular passage, Acts chapter 20, still the same place. So from Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called to him the elders of the church. You know, I probably misspoke earlier when I said that Paul wanted Timothy to appoint elder. Well, the church at Ephesus maybe already had elders. They had elders in Acts chapter 20, and so later, maybe they still had elders, and Paul is simply saying that this is what you are the character you should find in an elder. But anyway, that's beside the point I'm making here. From Miletus he sent to Ephesus and called to him the elders of the church. And so he talks to them for a while, and then he comes down to verse 28 where he says, be on guard for yourselves for all the flock among which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. And so the elders are the overseers. And so in a sense, the term elder describes the man. He's an elder. He's an older man. He's presbyteros. What is the work of the older man, the elder? Well, his work is to oversee. And so that word in the King James Bible translated bishop, but in other versions, overseer. Look at 1 Peter chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. And Peter addresses this issue, or makes some remarks that address this issue. He says in verse 1, therefore I exhort the elders among you as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ, and a partaker also of the glory that is to be revealed, to shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising the oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not for sordid gain, but with eagerness, not as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples to the flock. And so the elders, and then verse 2, are to exercise the oversight. And so what is it that elders do? They oversee. They're overseers. So elders, and the term elders and the term bishop or overseer really refers to the same office in the New Testament. The group of men who serve in this office is called the presbytery. And so in 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 14, we find that term. 1 Timothy 4 verse 14. Do not, Paul telling Timothy, do not neglect the spiritual gift within you, which was bestowed on you through prophetic utterance, with the laying on of the hands of the presbytery. The footnote says the board of elders, the group of elders, called the presbytery. Again, from the same word, presbyteros, which is an older man. So the New Testament doesn't make a distinction between the rank of a bishop or an overseer and the rank of an elder or a presbyter. Those terms referring to the same office. The work of these men is described in various ways. This is our second point. We talked about some of the terms that are used to refer to men who occupy this office. Their work is described in various ways as well. We've already seen from 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 2 and other passages as well that they are to exercise the oversight. And so they have authority in the church. We might say they don't have authority to make law, not in the same sense that the Lord makes the laws, but they have the authority to carry out the law that God has made or that the Lord has made. And so they do have some authority, some oversight of the church. Peter warns that they are to do this voluntarily and that they are not to lord it over the flock. They're not to be dictators and tyrants and sort of rule just, with an iron hand. They're not to lord it over the flock. They're to work in cooperation with the flock. And so, yes, they have authority to make decisions concerning the flock, and yet they're not to lord it over the flock. We also find that they are to shepherd the church. This is verse 2 again. Shepherd the flock of God among you. And we might just stop to say that their oversight is limited to the flock among them. That is, their particular flock. And so, the elders in the church at Oak Mountain, their oversight, their authority is limited to the church at Oak Mountain. And so our authority doesn't extend beyond to other churches or to an area that consists of several churches. And so you shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising the oversight. And so his work is described as shepherding or pastoring. That's the idea there, pastoring. Back in 1 Timothy chapter 3, Paul tells Timothy that the elder should manage his own household well, manage his own family well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own family or household, how will he take care of the church of God? So his work is to take care of the church. He's to take care of the church. But that doesn't mean he sits in his office and he sort of pushes papers and makes executive decisions, for the people with whom he has little contact. No. The church, remember, the church is always the people. And so his work is to take care of the people. Okay? And if he can't take care of his own family, how can he take care of the people in the congregation and take care of their spiritual needs and supply their needs and to correct them when they're in trouble and encourage them when they do good? So how can they take care of the people in their charge, Paul says, if they can't take care of their own family? In the book of Hebrews, chapter 13, Paul says, verse 17, obey your leaders and submit to them. Remember, the elder has a degree of authority. He's to exercise the oversight. And so here he's described as a leader or a ruler who leads. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they keep watch over your souls. As those who will give an account, let them do this with joy and not with grief, for this would be unprofitable to you. And so the word ruler or leader here means or refers to someone in a position of leadership. For example, in the government, but here in the church. And so a leader, a ruler. And then look also at 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 17. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 17. The elders who rule well. There's a little bit different word. It's translated rule, at least in the New American Standard Bible, but the elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. And so here the idea is to direct, to guide. And so here's someone who's ruling. They're directing the church. They're guiding the church. They're leading the church. And so basically synonyms, I suppose, but at least a different word technically. So he is to exercise the oversight, shepherd or pastor, to take care of the church, to lead the church, direct the church, rule the church. And so that would involve working with people, the people of the church, to help them grow and develop as Christians, to teach them, encourage, admonish, correct, to build them up, all of those kinds of things. Remember, his work is with the people. And so he's not just to be a hands-off administrator that has little contact with the people. Somebody said, I think it's a pretty good way to describe things. The shepherd ought to smell like the sheep. The shepherd that, he sort of stands away from the sheep and he sort of makes them go one way. Well, that's not the kind of shepherd that we need. We need the shepherd that gets down there with the sheep and he hugs them and he provides for them. And so he comes away, he smells like the sheep because he's actively involved with them. And so those are the kind of elders that we're looking for. People that take care of the sheep. The preacher may or may not serve the church in this way. And so in 1 Timothy 5 verse 17, the elders who rule well are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who work hard at preaching and teaching. And so the preacher may serve in this capacity as an elder, but not necessarily. And so there are instances where the preacher is not the pastor. Now, in some churches you have a single pastor system, but in the New Testament, the preacher may serve as an elder or a pastor, a presbyter, a bishop, but not necessarily. And so if he does not, well then he's under the oversight of the elders, and so he doesn't possess the same degree of authority that the elders possess in that particular situation. There's always a plurality of these men in the New Testament, always a plurality of these men in the local church. And so in Titus chapter 1, a passage we looked at a moment ago, Paul tells Titus, I left you in Crete that you set in order what remains and appoint elders. Notice that's plural, appoint elders in every city. That is the churches. In cities where there are churches, I want you to appoint elders in those churches. But it's plural in nature. Look at Acts chapter 11 and verse 30. This is, of course, early on in the history of the church. There are already elders in Jerusalem, in the churches at Judea. And so he says in verse 30, and this they did, sending it in charge of Barnabas and Saul to the elders. Again, notice that that's plural. In Acts chapter 14 and verse 30, or rather verse 23, when they had appointed elders for them in every church, having prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord in whom they had believed. And so again, notice that that's plural. In Acts chapter 15 and verse 2, when Paul and Barnabas had great dissension and debate with them, the brethren determined that Paul and Barnabas and some of the others of them should go to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders concerning this issue. In James chapter 5 and verse 14, if anyone is sick, he's to call for the elders, plural, of the church, and they are to pray for him. In Philippians chapter 1, there the letter is addressed to the overseers or bishops with the deacons and the saints. But again, it's plural. And so today in lots of churches out there, there's what I referred to a moment ago, the single pastor system. And so you have one man who has authority over the church. And so he makes the financial decision. He might get advice from others, but the authority ultimately rests with him. He makes the financial decisions and other decisions and so forth. But in the New Testament, there's always a plurality of men who serve in this capacity in a local congregation. These men were appointed in local churches from very early on in the New Testament. And so in Acts chapter 11 and verse 30, that's the first reference, I think, that to elders that we find. So the church at Jerusalem, in Acts chapter 11, they already had elders. Because some money that was sent to relieve the needs of needy Christians there, that money was sent to the elders. They already had elders by Acts chapter 11. In Acts chapter 14, Paul's on his first journey, and he appoints elders in every church. Acts 14, verse 23. Again, Acts 15 and verse 2, in Jerusalem they already had elders. In Acts 20 and verse 17, Paul calls for the Ephesian elders. We see it in the book of James, which is thought to be one of the earliest epistles in the New Testament, written perhaps about AD 50. And so we find elders in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Lystra, Iconium, Antioch of Pisidia, Ephesus, Philippi, from the mid-40s AD until the mid-60s, when Paul is in prison there and then even when he gets out of prison, or gets out of at least house arrest there in Rome, And so we find elders being appointed very early on. Throughout the course of the New Testament, elders are referred to by Paul and James and Peter and Luke. Now that constitutes a pattern, doesn't it? And some people these days, they object to that word pattern. You call it a model if you want to. I'm not married to the term pattern. You can call it a model, or you can call it precedent, whatever you want to call it. But when we look at the New Testament and we consider how should we organize the church, we find a clear pattern. Elders in every church exercising oversight of that particular local congregation. And of course, their work is also it's assisted by deacons who serve the congregation. We find apostles appointing elders, apostles telling others to appoint elders, telling them what to look for in men that might serve as elders, sending money to elders, meeting with elders, addressing letters to elders. That's a pattern, isn't it? And so if our objective is to abide in the apostles' doctrine, when it comes to this matter, how should we organize ourselves as a local congregation? We look to see if the apostles said anything that might help us make a decision, or did anything that might help us to come to the correct conclusion. Well, it's pretty clear, isn't it? We found elders in every church. Now, a local church may exist for a period of time without appointing men to this office. And so, in Acts chapter 13, Paul begins his first journey and goes from town to town, establishing churches. And then at some point he decides, let's go back through those cities where we established churches and appoint elders. And so for that period of time, between the time the church was established and Paul went back through them, appointing elders, for that period of time, those churches apparently existed without elders. And so we know that a church can exist without elders. If they don't have qualified men to serve as elders, or then they exist without elders. And so when this is the case, an orderly arrangement must be made so that the church can make decisions. A church has to make decisions. You have to decide what time you're going to meet, if nothing else, and where you're going to meet. And so an orderly arrangement must be made so that the church can make decisions. And so the members of the church have to consider the teaching of the New Testament concerning the church and make an arrangement to make decisions that would be in keeping with it, with the teaching of the New Testament. And so, theoretically, a church could decide, well, we don't have elders. There's sort of a rumor going around in some of the smaller classes that Bob is the head of the church. So in one of the small classes, the teacher said, all right, who's the head of the church? Mr. Bob, Mr. Bob. Apparently nobody thinks that's funny but me. Well, a church could say, well, we'll just make the preacher the head. No. Let him make all the decisions. No, we need to look at the teaching of the New Testament and make an orderly arrangement that's consistent with the teaching of the New Testament, and so that we can make decisions. Well, let's look at Paul's instructions to Timothy about appointing elders in the church. Those are just some things about elders, some observations about elders. Elders are also known as bishops in the New Testament. Their work is described in various ways, exercising the oversight or shepherding, pastoring, taking care of the church. There's always a plurality of men serving as elders. Their oversight is limited to the church that they're members of. And there's a clear pattern of this kind of organization or church government in the New Testament. And so let's go back to 1 Timothy chapter 3, and let's just notice a few things about the qualifications of these men. As we read through this, notice that the emphasis is on the character of the person to be appointed. It's not on the work itself. Now, if I were writing the letter, I might say something like, now, all right, Timothy, or Titus, you got an important job there. You need to appoint some men to serve as elders. Now, appoint a man who can do this. Appoint a man who can do that. But that's not really what he says. He says, I want you to look for this kind of character in this person. And if you can appoint a man that has this character, well, then he'll be able to do his work. And so that's the emphasis. The emphasis is on the character of the people involved. There's an interesting passage from outside the Bible in a work by a man named Onasander or Onasander. Don't know exactly, never heard it pronounced. Not exactly sure how to pronounce it. But he wrote a booklet about being a general in the army. And he says this: I believe then that we must choose a general not because of his noble birth as priests are chosen, nor because of wealth as the superintendents of the gymnasia, but because he is temperate, self-restrained, vigilant, frugal, hardened to labor, alert, free from avarice, neither too young nor too old, indeed a father of children if possible, a ready speaker, and a man with a good reputation. And so he said, when it comes to appointing generals in the army, look for these qualities. And the qualities sound a whole lot like the qualities that Paul mentions here in an elder. And so just as an army needs qualified men to serve as leaders, he's going to lead these men into battle, look for men with this kind of character, and then he goes on to elaborate on each one of those characteristics. The church needs qualified men who will be effective leaders. A general needs qualities that will help him lead men into battle. An elder needs to possess characteristics that will enable him to lead men and women in their service to Christ in the church. And so these are the qualities that these men should possess. Now Paul writes to Timothy and tells him, okay, here's what elders should be like. They should possess this kind of character and these characteristics. And so Timothy takes that, he looks among the church, and he teaches that. And in Titus is in Crete, different location. Paul writes to Titus and says, I want you to appoint elders. Now here are the things that you're to look for. Of course, the list of characteristics are very similar, not exactly the same, but very similar. So Titus takes his letter, the letter Paul writes to him, and he appoints elders, and Timothy takes that letter and appoints elders. No doubt if Paul wrote us a letter, it'd be very much like that. Look for the same kinds of characters. And so we use these lists of characteristics to find men qualified to serve as elders in local churches today. As we said a moment ago, most of these, not absolutely all of them, but most of them speak to his character. And I've divided them or kind of grouped them together into four areas. There are qualities that describe his personal character. There are qualities that describe his relationship with his family. There are qualities that describe his relationship to the church or his work in the church. And then qualities that refer to his relationship with the community. And so let's read them. An overseer then must be above reproach. That's character. That's personal character, isn't it? Above reproach. The husband of one wife. And so that would have to do with his family, but also his character. He's faithful to his wife. He's loyal to his wife. He's not a philanderer. He's not married several times. He's stable and reliable, the husband of one wife. And so I think that would speak to his character as well. Temperate, prudent, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. Again, that may not be personal character from an ethical or moral point of view, but it does have to do with his abilities within the congregation. He needs to be a teacher. He needs to be able to teach. After all, Timothy, you've got a problem there with false teachers, and we need leaders in the church that can respond to that. And so, able to teach. You look for an individual who would be able to, if error was taught. Now, he might not get up right that minute, but if you gave him a week or two to review it and get ready, he should be able to get up and say, this was wrong, and this was why it's wrong, and this is right. Able to teach. Not addicted to wine or pugnacious, but gentle, peaceable, free from the love of money. He must be one who manages his own household well, keeping his children under control with all dignity. But if a man does not know how to manage his own household, how will he take care of the church of God? Not a new convert. And so, again, that's not ethical character or moral character. That's just experience as a Christian. Not a new convert, so that he will not become conceited and fall into the condemnation incurred by the devil. And he must have a good reputation with those outside the church, so that he will not fall into reproach in the snare of the devil. And so he's got a good name in the community. And so that's the kind of individual that we're looking for to appoint as elder or to serve as an elder. Once qualified men are identified among those willing to serve, remember Peter says they would do this willingly, not of compulsion, no arm twisting, You serve willingly, not of compulsion. And so among those willing to serve, once men with these qualities are identified, they should be appointed and begin their work. Now we say the list in Titus is very similar, not exactly the same, but very similar, so we'll take the time to go over there and look at that. Well, Paul gives some additional instructions in 1 Timothy chapter 5 concerning elders. Elders who rule well, verse 17, to be considered worthy of double honor. You honor them because of who they are and the work they're doing. But some are worthy of double honor, which means they're worthy to be supported financially for their work, especially those who work hard in preaching and teaching. For the Scripture says, you shall not muzzle the ox while he's threshing, and the laborer is worthy of his hire. Do not receive an accusation against an elder, a man who occupies this office, except on the basis of 2 or 3 witnesses. Now, this is a serious charge when you bring an accusation against an elder, a leader in the church. And so you make sure that you have 2 or 3 witnesses to confirm what has happened and what's said. Now, those who continue in sin rebuke in the presence of all, so that the rest also will be fearful of sinning. Verse 22, do not lay hands upon anyone too hastily, and thereby share responsibility for the sins of others, and keep yourself free from sin. So I take that. Now don't appoint someone to this office too hastily. If you appoint someone too hastily, you might appoint someone who's not really qualified, and then it's going to be trouble. And so be careful. Take your time about it. Well, in conclusion, we'll just say every church should be striving to appoint elders. If we have visitors here tonight, if you're a member of a congregation that's gotten comfortable without elders, you need to fix that. You need to remind the congregation, we don't need to be comfortable in this situation. We need to be striving for the appointment of elders. Because that's God's plan, to have elders in every church. And you know what? His plan works. If you've been in a congregation that didn't have elders, and you went in one of those business meetings, and you did that for a while, and then you appointed elders, you appreciate, oh wow, this works. No wonder God designed it this way, So every church needs to be striving to that, or every church needs to be striving to add elders. All right? If you're in a situation where you're in a church and they have elders, don't get too comfortable, because the time is coming when you're going to need more elders. All right? And so strive to add men who will serve in this capacity. Just as churches suffer from the lack of elders, churches suffer when the congregation is not willing to respect the authority of elders. I'll just speak personally for a moment. We've been really blessed here at Oak Mountain. I think we've had good leadership through the years. And we have people that grow up here. They're young children. Maybe they're born here, young children when they come here, and they grow up here. And then they leave home and go to another congregation and sit in one of these business meetings. And that's the first time they've ever seen one brother get mad at another brother because he wanted to paint the auditorium white and somebody else wanted to paint it beige. But that's the kind of thing that happens. And so we've been very blessed, haven't we, that we haven't been faced with that kind of situation. Because a lack of effective leadership, that leads to problems. But you know what? The failure of the congregation to respect the authority of the elders, that leads to problems as well. And we've been very blessed in that regard also here. And so, no elders or no group of elders are perfect. They're going to make mistakes. Sometimes they'll make decisions that don't work out. And a congregation or somebody in the congregation that is continually a source of aggravation, continually challenging, calling into question the decision of the elders, casting down on their judgment, stirring up frustration and turmoil and discontent among the people. that's going to cause problems. So fortunately, we've had good leadership and we've had a good congregation that has respected the judgment of the elders and the decision of the elders. Even when the elders make decisions that somebody doesn't agree with, you still don't have this turmoil and discontent and aggravation and complaining. And so that's the way it should be. That's the way it ought to be. And unfortunately, that's the way it's been. And my prayer is that that's the way it will continue. People like that who are a continual source of complaining and challenging and aggravation, they're really insubordinate and need to be dealt with. And I've heard of an occasion or two where that's happened in churches. The church here at Oak Mountain, we're going to need more elders. If the church continues, and our prayer is that it will, we're going to need more. At the very least, as time passes, and the men that are serving as elders now grow older and eventually become unable to fulfill their duties or die, we're going to need men who will step up and say, and take on the responsibility, good qualified men who will step into that office and do that work. And so we're going to need, I can tell you, we're going to need it. And so my final exhortation is to young men, and that is to begin to prepare now for that time. If you're a young man, begin now to prepare yourself to serve as an elder when your time comes. We're going to need it. And so I hope, and my prayer is that we'll have men who are ready to take it on when that time arises. If you're here tonight, not a Christian, I do want to give you an opportunity to respond tonight. Perhaps on other occasions you've learned what you need to do to become a Christian, put your faith in Christ and repent of your sins, confess your faith, be baptized in Jesus' name, and you can be a Christian tonight. We can do that. We can accommodate that this very hour. If you're already a Christian but you're not ready to meet God, repent of the sin that's in your life and ask God to forgive. He's waiting. He's longing to forgive. If you'll just turn back to Him, He will. You can serve Him faithfully once again. If we can help you tonight, we invite you to come as we stand and sing together.